Hey everyone, this is Andrew Brown, and welcome to the free GenAI Bootcamp. I am joined with Quincy Larson, teacher and founder of freeCodeCamp.org. And it's not because he wrote it down there. I definitely know that for certain. but I really like that you put your title in there. I didn't put anything under mine. I really should have put something in there. But
I
next
think it
time,
just auto-populated that. I didn't type it
really?
in. Yeah.
Okay, so that means that probably GenAI, like you're in all the LLMs.
Yeah. Like you can ask LLMs about me. Like it actually knew the exact brand of keyboard that is right here that I use for my musical intros on the podcast and stuff.
Yeah.
It's like Quincy has a Key Station Mark III 49 M audio. Like I was surprised that it knew that.
I used it for something the other day. It was actually for my town. I've been trying to do like GenAI for seniors, and there was an old timey photo, and they were wondering what the car was in the photo, and so I asked it, and it became very close, probably if not perfect, at guessing the type of make model, and it reasoned as to like what it was. So that was very interesting. But I'm trying to get to the point where when I ask an LM, it knows who I am, but I'm not there yet. I gotta do
You've
a
got
little
a
more
super
community work.
common name is one challenge.
Yeah, that is.
There are only like 3 or 4 Quincy Larsons in the world that I know of, and they're all women, aside from me.
Okay. So, well, I guess it makes it a little bit easier to pin down there. But sometimes having a common name is at my advantage because often on social platforms, people will mistakenly tag me for things, for achievements in sciences and things that I never did. But sometimes it's not good stuff either. So I have to speak up a little bit. Yeah, so I just want to have a conversation about a Gen AI with you, as I think right now it is very popular. I'm not sure if we're at the top of the hype cycle for Gen AI.
The hype curve.
But or the hype curve, yeah. But I'm hoping that we can present it more reasonably than what is being presented out there. At least I see on the socials daily. I think it was like the newest model, which was DeepSeek, and people are saying, oh, it's as good as ChatGPT 01. But then when you looked at the model size, it was 271 billion parameters, and they were saying you didn't need GPUs, but you absolutely did, which to me was misleading. But it still is an impressive technology. And so I think that free and open source stuff is really exciting. But that model specifically comes from China. So China is obviously merging with a lot of open source models, which is really interesting. But I'm trying to segue over to this because I know a secret about Quincy. I'm not sure if it's a secret, but Quincy, you speak another language, right?
Yes, I speak. I technically speak like 4 languages, although not very well. I speak Mandarin and Cantonese because I spent a lot of time in both northern China and southern China, like 6 or 7 years total, and then I speak Japanese. But again, like I don't want you to think that like I have full native proficiency in either of these. I've been studying them for like 20 years.
Well, you probably know more kanji than I have, and so I mean, I think it's amazing that you put in the time and to learn these tools. But our boot camp is specifically around language learning and trying to use GenAI to build tools for assistive learning towards learning your languages. Do you have any thoughts about if that's a good thing or a bad thing?
Oh yeah, that's great. So one of the difficulties in learning a language, especially like, I mean, you can learn vocabulary and grammar and things like those are like you just have to put in a lot of time. You're not going to just organically soak up grammar and vocabulary like a baby would. Like a baby does that through brute force and just like so many interactions over so many years. An adult with like a motivated adult who knows basic concepts about learning how to learn and like how memory works and how retention works and like all these other different considerations, they can learn so much more efficiently than a kid. And that is one thing always bugs me, not to go off on like an old man tangent, but like people are like, oh, I can't learn this language because, oh, they grew up there. So of course they're like great. Like I know so many native speakers who have extremely like bad grammar in English and like restricted vocabularies and stuff like that. And it's just because they didn't put in deliberate practice to get better at English. They just took English for granted, right? And I'm sure that's the case for a lot of languages. But the hardest part is not like studying the grammar or getting the vocabulary. It's finding people who will tolerate you speaking their language in a broken way for hours
Mm-mm.
and hours so you can get the volume of practice necessary. And LLMs simply do not care. They do not get bored. They do not get tired. They do not get annoyed by your pedantic, questions about like, oh, but isn't it like this, why this word instead of this word? Like, don't they mean roughly the same thing? Like, it will never get tired. So it's a great tutor in terms of just like the volume of input and output you need to learn the language. So
Mm-mm.
I make heavy use of LLMs.
And so, yeah, I would find that was kind of my experience. Well, at least so far with my language learning is that I can use ChatGPT and it has a voice feature, and it's good enough that I can converse with it. Now, it's obviously I'd rather speak to a native speaker so that I can align a bit better. But in the absence of that, I'm making more progress, and that's the hardest thing. People give you a look, being like, "Oh, you're wasting my time," or "You really aren't where you need to be." But if you don't push through it, you're never going to get to that end goal.
Yeah.
So to me, that is really interesting. Um, but yeah, like besides language learning, have you been using GenAI for anything else? I know you are really into music. Have you tried applying it to any of your music, or are you keeping it all
So
old school right now?
I have kind of like strong feelings about like generative AI in terms of like actual like creativity. I don't think it's like particularly useful. I haven't seen any uses for it in terms of like doing anything other than just saving money. Like if you don't want to pay an artist to do an art asset, then you can generate it. Like FreeCodeCamp, basically, we have a policy that we don't use any generated content. There are exceptions in that we will, like, for example, people who have degenerative voice issues, like Andrew Brown, like we're happy to like publish videos where he's used his own personal voice and he's created used voice synthesis to
Mm-hmm.
build like that is an exception, but in general I am a little bit more hesitant to use generative AI. Like I wouldn't want to just create some background elevator, like create some elevator music that I could play in the background. And I think part of that is like frankly I'd like to create that music myself. And same thing with writing. Like it's just that the quality of the output is not great for it's not ready for prime time, and maybe someday it will be ready for prime time, but even then, like how do they get ready for prime time? Well, consuming the corpus of work that other people have created. So I don't need to think that I'm bearish on generative AI. I think it's great for personal use for things like language learning. I think it's great for being able to, like, FreeCodeCamp has 600,000, 700,000 forum posts on our forum that we could potentially like feed in and create like a fine-tuned LLM that people could interact with, and that may be something we do, right? But right now we prefer people to interact with humans. So I don't need to think like I'm just like
Oh
go
yeah.
AI. I'm not like one of those AI influencer type people. I'm actually kind of like a critic about how a lot of these things have happened. So I didn't mean to like launch into the whole
Oh yeah,
thing,
yeah, yeah.
but I do think it's important to note that like I'm not just blindly saying like this is amazing. Like, oh, I can have free music, I can have free articles, I can have free everything because like the artists were completely circumvented in the process, right? So
Mm-mm.
I do use technology in music. Actually, I don't use it very much at all. When I record music for like the FreeCodeCamp introductions, I play all the instruments myself, and I intentionally do not use pitch correction or quantization, which is where you like fix the tempo and get everything perfect on grid. You can
Mm-mm.
do that in a lot of modern music. It's done that way, but I feel that it loses some of the soul. So I refuse to do that. But that's like a decision that I make. It's not,
Mm-mm.
I'm not trying to force everybody else to like abandon these tools. They're very powerful tools if you want to play pop music and you don't have good time as a drummer or something like that. Like, but it is a handicap, frankly. And I think using AI would probably be a handicap for most musical and writing purposes. I don't like. So I'll tell you what one thing I do with generative AI is I do use it for a fast pass fact checking. Like whenever I send
Mm.
out my email newsletter, I want to be absolutely sure that I'm not giving people the wrong impression when I'm trying to describe like why Kubernetes is useful or how RSA works or something like that. When I have my email newsletter, I try to like quickly summarize so that even if people don't click through to the article, they've still gotten some value out of reading like a paragraph about that thing that summarizes what that article is. And I don't use LLMs at all to generate any text that I publish anywhere,
Mm-mm.
but I will use it to sanity check So as kind of like a substitute for actually having a professional fact checker that goes out and checks. And then my knowledge combined with like GPT 4.0, which is the model I usually use, is enough that I feel confident. Okay, there's probably not a factual error because Abby, our editor, didn't catch anything. I didn't catch anything, and GPT is not catching anything. If that makes sense.
Oh yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, and so for this boot camp, I wanted to shore up the numbers, and so I was like, okay, I got to make a very strong, inspiring post, and I just like I had to just really sit down and just hammer it out, and I went out and brought us in like 4,000 people in a day or two, but I can't get that from LLMs because they don't have that level of creativity. I see posts on social media that I go, this could be written by an LLM where it analyzes this common pattern. And I suppose there's a baseline where it does work for folks, but they can't get the same result as the creative result that I have because I'm not following. I'm not, I'm trying to make something original. Brian, who's in our boot camp, he always does creative things behind the scenes. Like he'll make like a boot camp theme song or things like that. And so I said use GenAI, and he generated out a song, but he couldn't use it as is. Like he had to tweak it, do some post editing on it. He tried to take my voice and then voice clone it onto the song, and or like if like you could download individual parts of the tracks. I'm not a sound engineer, but he is. And so he goes, yeah, you could get like whatever this is, the drum beat or whatever, and then intermix stuff. And so it's kind of like a medium that you could work with, but you wouldn't ship it as is.
Right. And the main challenge with music is like, frankly, like you can just go into Logic Pro and you can get like license paid for by like Apple, of course, makes Logic Pro, and it's a huge loss leader for them. You pay $200, you have the software forever, free updates every like, and it's $200 for like production quality. Like this is what like Billie Eilish and her brother use to make music and stuff, right? And there are a huge library of drum loops, and then if you know anything about music at all, like even the most rudimentary stuff, you can just play a quick bass line. You can program everything. You don't actually need to be able to mechanically play any sort of musical instruments, and like I could just like bust out Logic Pro and create a song within a few minutes that would be like passable for like a podcast intro or something. Like, and I'm not saying like I'm a great musician or anything like that, but I'm just saying it's really easy. Like there's no reason to use GenAI for these things in my humble opinion, because it's going to be garbled and it won't pass the uncanny valley. There will be artifacts. You can tell kind of like the musical instruments like mushing together and stuff. And it's the same kind of like how acoustic guitar playing Anime Girl has 5 fingers, like, and yes, they may solve that, but there will be other little artifacts that you can just tell. And the state of the art will continue to move, but people's eyes will continue to get sharper and they'll get better at spotting these things. And when they keep seeing things that are kind of samey in terms of the shading or something like that, then they're gonna like there's I'll show you some art. Yeah, I don't know if I can share my screen.
Oh yeah, you can share.
Let me see if I can find it. Just give me a second.
Here, I'll do a pause so we can pull it up.
Okay.
We are sorry. Yep.
So this is art. I just talked with this artist, and I was like, I want this shot from Initial D, but I want me playing bass in front of it, like playing, my blue Fender P bass. And he worked on it and iterated, and I was like, the eyebrows look a little weird. I mean, it doesn't look perfect, but this was like a conversation back and forth. I found him on Reddit. He was doing good work, and I paid him $35 to do this. And it's digital art, but it's real. It's real art. It's not AI generated. And yes, he probably didn't like go and like hand draw every single leaf in the background and stuff like that. He probably used tools to do this, just like a musician would use like a beat loop, or might not kind of like create their own synth voice, but would use a preset. Like the tools are quite powerful, and you don't need to hand the entire process over to generative AI. You can just you can get the budget reasonable without having to just have AI slop. So again, the reason I say all that is I just want to emphasize that you don't have to cut the cost to free. If you spend even a little time and a little bit of money, you can have a much better result that has a human touch to it. So that is one thing. Like I'll caution people, like don't go overboard. I think it's a very useful tool for like, hey, I'm trying to come up with like some country western theme. Can you give me some ideas? And then you listen to those ideas and you're like, I kind of like where this is going, and use that almost as like a template for what you want to do. But that's very different from just like, here, it's done. And I see a lot of people doing it just quick and easy. Like, anybody can do a startup. Like, you don't need to hire artists anymore. You don't need to hire musicians. You don't need to hire developers. Some people even go that far, right? But I will emphasize that, like, if you care about quality, you should have a human in the loop, and you don't want to just take AI slop and put it out there. Like, the world doesn't need that. The world doesn't need text written by AI, like filling up the Google search, things like that. Like, and yes, you can make money. There will be people out there like in Estonia and places like that, that like their hourly rate is so low that it's worth it for them to just sit there and like, automate creation of thousands of websites. They get like a few $100s in AdSense traffic a month or something like that, and that'll be a good living for them. But that's to everybody else's detriment, because Google becomes harder to use and they crowd out real organic search. So again, I didn't want to like stand on a soapbox and say generative AI is bad, but I do want to say that like it's not all good. And a lot of this is frankly like built off of stolen intellectual property. Like freeCodeCamp is almost certainly crawled. We're getting more crawlers than ever on freeCode. Like the forum, the traffic of crawlers exceeds the traffic of actual humans at this point, because so many people are trying to mine our forum for tokens that they can feed into their LLMs that they're trying to train. So and that is against our terms of service, and we put the thing, but people still crawl it like that anyway.
So what you're saying is, if I want people to use my custom JavaScript framework, I just need to make more materials for freeCodeCamp on it, and then all the LLMs will produce it. But
all the LLMs will recommend it. Yes,
but that's maybe that's the new way to go viral. And like there was for some of the projects here, I find that I will try to use GenAI to a point, and then I'll stop using it, and then eventually I just won't even be using it. I won't even realize it, and then I'll go back. So it'll be interweaving back and forth, but it only works because it's coding at a level that I understand. And if it's doing something beyond your knowledge or means, you basically are stuck, and then you might have to rip it all down and work back up to that knowledge base until you are at the same level. But I would say that the tools are very powerful if you know what you're doing, right? If you are a musician, then you know how to, like, you don't need it, but you can leverage it. And so the fundamentals are not going away. You have to go through it no matter what, regardless of what people think in terms of, for replacing their labor force at the entry level. You know what I mean? It doesn't add up to me.
Yeah, and I'll just be clear that I do think to some extent, like, you can replace some degree of like junior developers, or maybe even like the kind of like lower skill people in the workforce that haven't necessarily built up that foundation, and like, are just creating like WordPress, like taking WordPress templates and deploying them and doing very basic stuff. I do think that those jobs are in danger, and I always encourage people to keep climbing above the waterline as the waterline continues to rise, which it always has. Technology has always taken more routine, less, I guess, cerebral work, and automated it, right? Like, I mean, like even during the Industrial Revolution in the 1800s, we had like certain types of looms and stuff like that. There used to be women who were spinsters, and they would literally just like work on thread, like producing thread all the time. And it was miserable work, but it was work that needed to be done by somebody, and so they didn't get very much money, and it was usually just like old widowers and people like that, just spinning thread all the time, and it would cost like $2,000 to make like a dress shirt, because the materials were so difficult to come by. And then of course we had like some degree of automation during the Industrial Revolution, and now the result is I can go to like Walmart or something, and I can buy a dress shirt for like $10. That is good enough. All right, it doesn't need to be an artisanal handcrafted like Versace shirt or something like that, right? It's functionally okay. And I think that LLMs are going to do stuff for a lot of things, but for something that's infinitely reproducible, like code or like music or like art, it's not like the actual cost of production is not the big part. It's usually the cost of distribution and everything like that is the big deal, right? So if you can make infinite copies of it, there's no, like, you can spend a little, it's okay to spend a little more time on a piece of music that is going to be infinitely reproduced. If you were doing like a performance at some wealthy person's house and stuff like that, and you wanted to bring a drum machine since you didn't want to hire a drummer, so I think that's different, right? But if you're making a recording that you're actually going to get an actual drummer, get an actual artist to do the art instead of relying on it, the actual costs are pretty negligible. Sorry, I don't mean to like beat the dead horse about it, but I just encourage people to be discerning in terms of how they apply this, and not just throw like their actual critical thinking out the window and just like use the tool for everything, right?
We could ground this into something that is a very basic language for people starting out, which is HTML.
Yes.
And so LLMs can knock out HTML left, right, and center, no problem now. But as the learner, you still need to know how to do it, right? You see it, like, understand it, and so you need to spend enough time in it until you can move beyond that. But your job's not going to be writing day in, day out, like 100% HTML from scratch, like it used to be. But that doesn't mean that you will never have to go in there and make changes or spend hours writing HTML at some time in your job. But it seems like it's less about being good at HTML and more about troubleshooting or using like the skills of whatever the human brain can do. I guess it's troubleshooting and problem solving, because once you get to a certain point, it's just, that's what you're leveraging, I think. I don't know if that's well described.
And it's worth noting, like, for a lot of routine things like HTML, CSS, why would you trust an LLM, which is just the next probable token predictor, system, when there's like really good boilerplates out there? Just go on GitHub, you can find a really good boilerplate, and you can use that as the basis of your project. And then, yes, like, hey, I need to create a custom component that will go into this larger boilerplate that I cloned from GitHub, that was written by a bunch of software engineers, that is actively maintained and has like all these pull requests and open issues and stuff like that. I would just urge people to think critically about what's already out there that you don't have to rely on LLM for, and then LLMs help with the more custom part, right? Like, just because LLMs exist does not mean that you abandon like reading books about language and like language learning, like that suddenly like these excellent grammar guides and stuff just go out the window. I'm just going to talk to the LLM. You're going to have an inferior experience if you do that. But if you need something extremely specific that is more specific than you would be able to find good results on Google for example, that is when the LLMs become extremely useful. Like, I was asking an LLM like a very specific question about like 2 different Japanese verbs that seem to be used almost interchangeably. I was like, what's the nuanced difference here? Like, why should, and when I Googled, I couldn't find an article about that. Nobody thought to ask such a specific question, but LLMs, because they've read the entire internet, they can kind of synthesize and answer this reasonably good. So like, that is where I think LLMs and AI in general is really useful, or is for extremely specific, extremely bespoke questions that only need to be asked once by a few people in the world, right? That only a few people would care that much about, and it would not be worth calling up some linguistic PhD and like asking them. It wouldn't be worth the time, if that makes sense.
Well, I have a Japanese language instructor. She's actually in the boot camp. She taught us the Japanese primer for the boot camp, if folks choose to use Japanese as their target language. But I will, when I want questions, I will go to ChatGPT, ask them there, and then bring that information to my teacher. Because if I ask without that information, she might not understand what I'm trying to get at. But then when she has that information in front of her, she can better reason with that information than I can if I was to read it. And so, again, I'm still using real humans to validate these things. I don't just take them for their word for it. Or we have Rolla, who is an AI engineer, but her background is like neuroscientist. So she's like legit whatever. And I notice when I'm always talking to her, she's always like, I have to go sort a look at the sources. And she's like pulling at all these books and stuff. And she's not using LLMs to be like, oh, is this the truth and this the truth? She's like literally going through and checking and making sure that everything is correct. And like, that's the best person that would know how to leverage AI and that's how she does things, which is really interesting.
Yeah, they're amazing as a first pass for research.
Yeah, first pass. Yeah. So for let's talk about where freeCodeCamp is going, or how GenAI will influence the roadmap for learners in the future. So, is there are you getting a lot more GenAI content on the platform, or is it still a mix of traditional and then GenAI is its own isolate thing? Do we foresee GenAI changing the method of learning down the road?
Yeah.
Sorry.
So I have pretty nuanced. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, we talk about this all the time, and
Mm-hmm.
I've talked with a lot of people. Like I talked with Sean Wang Swix about this. He believes that AI engineering is like 90% web development, 10% knowing how to leverage generative AI and knowing how to use various APIs
Mm-hmm.
of foundation models and things like that. Um, so generative AI, like in general, I would say we're going to teach people how to use it. We already do. Like if you start Googling around for different topics on YouTube, just like search YouTube and put in different terms like, retrieval augmented generation or, vector embeddings and things like that, like fine tuning. Like you're going to see a lot of full length courses on that are from the freeCodeCamp YouTube channel. You're also going to hopefully see some courses taught by Andrew Brown, who's been teaching a lot of these topics. And that we're going to continue to cover these things. As far as the actual core curriculum, we're going to teach how these things work rather than teaching how to use them, because frankly, it's more important to understand how to train a model and how these work. The actual usage of them is, something that like literally any high school student could like say, "Hey, I want to write a program like this," and it'll get easier and easier, and the actual prompting will get easier over time as these things get more interaction with users and like better idea of like what people actually want and what constitutes like a good output and stuff like that. And that process will naturally happen because all these giant corporations are spending billions of dollars trying to get the models like incrementally better and stuff like that. We want people to actually understand what's happening under the hood, understand the mathematics, understand the computer science fundamentals that will allow them to be able to like look at the output and be like, okay, why did it choose this output? Like, where could this have gone wrong? Just like if you're looking at a stack trace, you can just take that stack trace and dump it into Stack Overflow, and somebody can maybe tell you the answer. You could like start Google searching like a specific error message and then just copy paste. And you don't necessarily understand what happened, why it happened. You just understand how to get past that thing and on to the next error, right? That's like all programming is moving from one error message to the next, right?
That's right. Yeah.
But the actual comprehension and understanding, I think, is the most important thing. So we're going to be continuing to focus on more like foundational skills, even as we do teach tools in kind of like an extracurricular way. I hope that's not too convoluted of an answer.
No, I mean that makes sense to me, and it's really interesting because when I talk to folks in the space about again, these are not educators, but these are people that there's two ways they go. If you want to use GenAI, you need to fully understand all the stuff behind it before you dive into it, and then there's other camp where it's like all the fundamentals don't matter because you can just use the tools, so just learn how to use the tools. And to me, it's a bit like the tools are changing constantly. So like even the stuff that we're doing in this bootcamp and in the GenAI Essentials course is going to be dated in a year. Like even at the start of this bootcamp, it'll be like, is DeepSeek in the bootcamp? It'll be like, it just came out, right? Like, and if you focus on those tools as opposed to the conceptual skills, the fundamental stuff underneath, that's going to last longer than any like even ChatGPT. Like maybe it's gone by the end of this bootcamp. We don't know. So again, I take a mixed approach because I know people want to learn the tools,
Yeah.
but the fundamentals is what's going to carry you further. And so just because you don't have to learn the fundamentals, you're going to get a lot farther if you do.
Yeah.
And you're going to find out later on you're going to want to know how to do them, right? So
I mean, just keep in mind that it's in their best interest, the tool company's best interest, for you to not learn the foundational skills and just become dependent on their tools. I mean, like Oracle doesn't want you to learn how to deploy your own relational database using open source database. They want you to pay them millions of dollars to buy an Oracle solution and have them come in and oversee the whole thing and have you be able to continue to extract money from you. Like that's how business works, right? Similarly,
building your moat.
To become a developer,
right?
They want you to just
Yeah.
continue to pay them ridiculous amounts of money to use their no code platform. When if you spend some time and energy like actually learning how to do things, maybe you wouldn't need all this stuff, right? And I'm not saying no code is bad or that like hosted databases are bad or anything like that. I'm just saying that like left to their own devices, Jensen Huang is literally on stage telling people don't bother learning the code anymore, which is preposterous, right? I think Sam Altman said that. I think a lot of people, like, in the AI, I think Mark Zuckerberg might have said that recently. Like,
Probably.
they don't know what the hell they do know what they're talking about, and they're choosing to lie. They're choosing to say that coding is not a useful skill because it suits their interests, for people to not bother learning these things, so they can just become dependent on a few key people who have the Promethean fire, or the fire of the gods, that the gods stole the fire back from Prometheus. Essentially, is kind of like what's going on.
The alternate theory is that they are trying some grand experiment, and they're going to have some very interesting results that might not work well for them. So because some of them really truly believe. Again, we can't speak for all of them, but with these large companies, you do have to say, like, where's the moat, because that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to figure out a way to capture in this field. One area was fine tuning. So, like, if you go and try to fine tune a model on AWS, by the way, AWS is a sponsor of Bootcamp, and I'm talking about them. I don't care. But AWS has fine tuning in Amazon Bedrock. Once you fine tune it, it's very cheap to do, but you can't download the model weights, right? And also, when you do that, then you're locked into paying for provision compute. And so you go, maybe I'll go use Predibase. It has open weight model, or like allows you to at a cheaper cost, whatever. But they don't let you download the weights. A lot of them don't let you download. And so, and everyone says that fine tuning is really, really expensive. But I figured out a way to fine tune for like $10, right? So, this thing of anyway, my point is that always look for the moat, I guess, if that helps. But
yeah, I mean, like just be a critical thinker. Like, this is something that everybody needs to learn, and we're all getting a lesson in critical thinking as like all these scams propagate, and scams are just going to get worse. Like, think critically. Okay, why is this person trying to get me to send them a bunch of gift cards? Like why did this person put all this time and energy in calling me up and chatting me up?
They just really want to give you a gift. I guess a really good example is I guess razors, because there used to be straight edge razors, and then once everybody was on the disposable ones that were more convenient, then nobody knew how to use the old ones anymore, and then they raised the cost of it, and now we're starting to go back to learning how to use razors again. So I mean, it's just really interesting that the same things happened over and over again. But in this bootcamp, for those that are listening, that's why I'm putting so much local LLM content in here and open source stuff. And, your goal as a bootcamper is to try to make things work with whatever you can. So a lot of stuff I'll be showing, you might not have the same hardware, but find out what works for you. And that's what I'm just saying to our audience here. But I mean, I think we covered quite a bit of grounds there. Is there anything else that you'd like to leave our boot campers with?
I mean, I'll just say what I always say. Like, don't neglect the fundamentals. These tools are incredibly powerful. But I mean, in 1995, Microsoft Front Page was incredibly powerful, and a lot of people probably deluded themselves into thinking, I don't need to learn HTML. I don't need to learn CSS. I can just use Microsoft Front Page. And I'll tell you, there are probably very few Microsoft Front Page powered websites that are still live today. Like, the tools will continue to improve, and they'll be dazzling, and they'll be jammed down your throat, like by marketers and stuff like that. That is fine. Learn how to use those tools, but do not neglect your fundamentals. And the way you build up fundamentals is just learn a little bit every day. Just spend 30 minutes a day coding if you can, or listening to podcasts with actual developers and not just marketers and hype men running them, where they actually talk about software engineering, and learn as much as you can from the actual people who are building the stuff, and don't lose sight of the actual builders who are enabling these things, because like this wave will crest, and there will be a lot of stuff left over after the hype cycle runs its course, and a lot of these tools are going to mature, and they're going to become ubiquitous. I like to think of like spreadsheets, right? Like, LLMs are like spreadsheets. They can dramatically improve your productivity if you're like somebody who has to work with numbers all day. But at the end of the day, somebody who's very good at using spreadsheets is going to dramatically outperform typical high school student who's just using them for the first time. Like it is going to be a tool. It's going to be a skill set to know when and how to apply it. I mean, just because a builder at a construction site has access to a nail gun and can just go does not mean that there's like not a lot of value in like framing something properly and figuring out like the precise locations of anchoring and all that stuff to like do it properly. Right? So don't lose sight of the actual skills, and don't put too much of your ability into specific tools, because those tool companies are going to come back and they're going to try to tax you for the rest of your career if you get too into their ecosystem. Adobe's a great example. Like, people put a ton of time and energy in learning Adobe because it was like $200 and I've got the software and I've got it forever. And then like what happens? They try to move it over to a service and they try to charge you a whole bunch of money, and they try to charge you cancellation fees when you stop using Adobe. And like they create this moat that you mentioned, high switching costs. And next thing you know, you're paying Adobe $30 a month for the rest of your professional career because you've become dependent on their software. Or you can spend a whole lot of time learning how to use DaVinci Resolve, or learning how to use like Inkscape, or like a lot of these other tools, right? Like, and frankly, like, just get out ahead of those things. Like keep it in mind. And as long as you understand the fundamental things, like there will always be some very smart, person or group of people who create a comparable open source version of anything that's public. Like, and in this case, it's even the giant corporations are creating open weight models that you can use. So you don't have to become super dependent on a proprietary one. So just keep like the long thing in mind, and keep in mind that like these companies are going to try to sell you tools that seem great, and probably are great, but that there will come a time when they're just like in the extractive mode and they're not necessarily shipping features as quickly and stuff like that. And as long as your mind is agile, you'll be able to jump over to a different tool. You need to be very mercenary in your tooling, and don't get too loyal to any one company or provider, because like that loyalty is only going to cut one way.
Yeah, and so I'm hearing a very strong message of sustain, or what's the word? Not self-sustainable. Yeah, I guess it's self-sustainable, right? So,
yeah,
I'm out here and self-reliance. That's the word I'm looking for. So self-reliance is a skill that people have to remember to do. I do it literally real. Like, I'm trying to build a masonry stove so that I can
very cool
get off electricity here. But I appreciate your time, Quincy. And for those I just that don't know, we'll just give them another reminder that we do have a page on the bootcamp that lists a ton of free resources for GenAI that you can utilize, and it covers a lot of things that I just did not have time to cover, or I simply did not have the knowledge to cover. And so try to make use of those free resources, because they're generously provided by the community, and we greatly appreciate freeCodeCamp, doing what they're doing and making sure that free content still exists here, to the degree that it does on the internet here. But that's all I have, and we'll catch you all later.
Thanks for the opportunity, Andrew. Everybody, happy coding.
Adios.